Good evening. I'm Apostle T.B. Walker. I want to talk to you about when confusion becomes both mercy and judgment, both at the same time. Let's look at Genesis chapter 11. I want to talk about the Tower of Babel tonight. It says, this is 11 verses 1 through 9. It's more verses than I normally like to read, but I think we need to hear this. It says, now when the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And then they said one to another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had bricks for a stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is unto the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. Now, this is the part I want you to get. Lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they have all one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. So he says, come, let us go down. And there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another, and not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad upon over the face of the whole earth. It is from there. Now, when you look at the Tower of Babel, when you look at Babel by itself, it's taught more or less a language against pride. Right? It's taught as a lesson that, we need to deal with our own pride, the ability to be lifted up. And it's certainly about that. But there's a deeper, truer, hidden message in this. Babel is not just a tower. It's about communication. It's about purpose. It's about unity. It's about the power of human agreement. Verse number 1 says, the whole earth was of one language and one speech. This means that they were experiencing something that we have never experienced in our time. That's perfect communication. There are no language barriers. There are no misunderstandings. There are no translation issues. People could instantly understand what the other one actually meant. So when you look at this, notice what happened. It says they came together and they said, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach into the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. So immediately after the ability to communicate, it produced cooperation. Cooperation produced innovation. This innovation then produced technology, and this technology produced power. Now, the problem with all of this was not that the production of power or the production of innovation or any of those issues, that any of those things was a problem. It was self-serving power. They believe they can do anything. God says this in verse number 6, said the people is one. They have one language, and this is what they begin to do. He sees what they're doing with this power of unity. He says, now nothing will be restrained from them, which they've imagined to do. Now, I want you to think about the statement. This is God, the creator of all things. He's acknowledging the incredible power of a unified humanity. But this is not all. This is not God simply looking in shock. This is not surprise, nor is there any ambiguity here whatsoever. What God is looking at is the potential of falling man. He knows exactly what he's looking at. He's looking at something that is awesome in its power, but is more often than not terrible in its consequences. It is self-destructive. It is self-serving, self-aggrandizing, and eventually it is prideful that goes before a fall. So it always leads to the destruction of humanity. The issue is not the tower. God was not mad at the tower. The issue was that mankind was in united rebellion against God rather than obedience to God. God had given them a command, right? They were under a strict command to spread out, to go out and to multiply. God had a plan for the earth, and they were a part of that plan, but they did not want to be a part of the plan. They said, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. We need to stay here. We're big and bold enough ourselves. Look at what we've created thus far. We've built the city, and now we have this huge building project in building this tower, and it's going to reach up to the heavens. We are going to exceed any of humanity's expectation. We don't know what this looked like, but I can promise you that they're dealing in real serious technology. They're understanding the dynamics of wind and the dynamics of construction like we know it now. This is modern architecture at work. How they would be able to do this, how they would be able to get the stones to lift that high, what they would know about physics is phenomenal. So when you look at this is before radio, this is before TV, this is for the internet. They recognize something. Communication creates power. That's what they learned then. They knew it then. We know it now. One of the greatest gifts that God has ever given man has been language, right? Businesses are succeeding right now because people are able to communicate. Families are able to be healthy and stay together because people communicate. Churches are growing, and churches grow because people communicate. And when you see a nation that is prospering, that nation prospers because the nation are people of communicators. They're able to communicate. So when communication breaks down, everything else begins to break down. Society begins to break down. So many marriages that you see are going to be destroyed, not by infidelity, not by hatred, not by a lack of love, but by misunderstanding. Many friendships are going to end. People are going to part ways that have known each other since they were children, not because of any evil intentions, but because communication fails. Churches will divide. They were supposed to stay together because people stop listening to each other. So Babel teaches us a major league lesson that communication is the foundation of fellowship. If you don't have communication, you can't have fellowship. And Babel is not a symbol of fellowship. It's a symbol of fellowship lost. Listen, come, let us go down, is what the Lord says. And let's confuse their language that they may not understand one another's speech. When God confused the language, he did more than just give them some different, distinct dialects. He did more than just make sure they couldn't understand each other. He fractured human fellowship. This was a forced separation, but it was more than just punishment. There was mercy in this. God is dividing man both linguistically, he's dividing man geographically, because he's going to slow the collective rebellion of fallen man. Had they stayed together, they would have destroyed themselves. Listen, can you imagine waking up one morning and you're not able to understand your closest friend? You're not able to understand any of your coworkers. You're not able to understand some of your family members. The builders who were building the cities and the towers could no longer cooperate because they could no longer communicate. Communication is the bridge to fellowship. So this is why the enemy attacks communication so hard. He knows that this is how fellowship begins, when people can't talk anymore, when they no longer are able to have a civil conversation, when they can't take criticism, when they cannot be built up, which means that I need to be built up. When those things are there, when pride begins to come in, it's going to go before fall. So there are many marriages that are going to end, not because people don't love each other, but because they misunderstand one another. The enemy wants believers to misinterpret each other. He wants races and cultures and generations to speak past each other rather than to speak to each other. And that's our world. When you begin to look at our world, there's an inability to communicate. Now, again, there's some mercy in this, but God is creating now this inability because he wants to slow down man's collective coming together to do nothing but evil. Remember, in the old world before the flood, men had come together. They were unified in doing evil. Their intentions were just continually evil. And now you see that they had not progressed much after the flood, that evil seed was still there. So God now begins to create something here that looks like it's going to be a horror show for humanity, but it is at the end a blessing for humanity, because now rebellion is slowed down. There's no way for them to rebel in that way. And it's going to make rebellion harder from a universal standpoint. You may have pockets of rebellion, but for it to spread all over the world, you need people to understand each other. And the fact that they don't, that leaves pockets of those who still call upon the name of the Lord. Listen, the inability to communicate creates isolation, and isolated people become suspicious people. When you look at this, Babel was affected in so many ways, and it affected technology. God said nothing will be restrained from them. There's nothing the whole account is that there's an anti-God dictator. There's an organized rebellion against God, and there's direct distrust of his promises concerning humanity. So when you look at this is not just in relation to just one incident, but this is God showing us the heart. And listen, time and progress in government and organization made man better off, but it did not make man better. Human advancement slowed. It slowed dramatically after Babel. When you look at where we are right now, in comparison to what they had right there, God slowed so many things. Babel, and because of Babel, technology was at a snail's pace. There were things that we find archaeologically that we can't understand. The Sphinx and how the pyramids are built. There's so much technology that was there before time that has been slowed up because of the sin of Babel. Knowledge began to be scattered. Ideas began to be separated by people, and groups began to isolate. So instead of one human civilization sharing any discovery instantly, knowledge began to become divided among nations. Can you imagine at any point in our lives if scientific discoveries were throughout history have been shared? If they had been instantly known around the world, that means that human advancement would have accelerated dramatically. People would have gone to another level right away. But Babel's technology slowed because it scattered human cooperation. Because men do not cooperate, these things now begin to slow down. Our learning slows down. Even today, there are many breakthroughs that happen from various nations, from various people, from various backgrounds and disciplines of work. But yet because we don't work together, there's one country that has something that other countries never even know about. There are some countries that are moving into the new century, and there's some countries that look like they're in the 19th century. Many in the 20th century, though we are right in the 21st century, because we do not work together. Unity accelerates progress, but division slows it. Watch, and you see in our country in the same thing that's happening right now all over the world. As we get divided, progress slows. We may know more, have access to more, but we are just dumb as doorknobs because we do not in any way see the fullness of things. Listen, when you look at Babel, it affected religion. It affected humanity spiritually. And before Babel, there's only one human family, right? After Babel, people are scattered. There are different cultures, there are different traditions, and eventually even different religious systems. As the nation spread, as they're scattered, many people lost the true knowledge of God, and they began to create idols. They began to create their own ideologies. They began to create their own religions. So the confusion of language immediately went to confusion into belief. That's why you look at the great miracle of the New Testament, it occurs on this day of Pentecost, right? There's the miracle of language we begin to see at Pentecost. At Babel, language were divided. At Pentecost, God used them to speak in tongues that united people around Christ. God did not eliminate languages at Pentecost. He transcended them. Something bigger than language. The gospel was heard by millions of people from many nations. Well, maybe not millions of people, but many, many thousands of people from many nations in their own tongue. In their own tongue. Can you imagine that? With sin divided, the spirit healed. What sin caused to slow progress, the spirit began to accelerate progress. So why did God use confusion? Well, you know what? And why did God intentionally create confusion in this situation? Listen, it is sometimes God uses confusion as a form of mercy. And that's a hard thing for us to see because there's scripture that says God is not the author of confusion. The people of Babel were united, but they were united in the wrong direction. Confusion that we stir up is confusion from the enemy that is meant to leave you bewildered and out of the will of God. But the confusion here was to redirect them. God saw that they were on the wrong road, that what they were pursuing was dangerous. And let me tell you something what God did. This is really hard for us to get, but sometimes God will disrupt our plans because success would destroy us. If we got what we wanted, if the plan actually worked, success would be the worst thing that would happen to us. Sometimes God scatters what we're trying to build because it excludes him. He knows that there's nothing good. Not every door is a door of judgment. Sometimes it's mercy. Not every delay is punishment. And I want to leave you with this because we miss sometimes what we think is punishment, and it's sometimes God's protection. Not every time that is confusion, it's of the devil. Sometimes God is interrupting a future disaster. There are things that are going to destroy you that God is simply derailing so you never get to that spot. The lesson of Babel is not simply don't be proud. Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. No, it is that human agreement is incredibly powerful. And when people communicate, they can accomplish almost anything. But unity without God is dangerous. That's the message. The goal is not merely to be unified with each other, but the goal is to be unified with God first. I'll leave you with that. Seek me first, the kingdom and my righteousness, and all these other things shall be added unto you. God first. God bless you. Have an awesome rest of your Friday.